it just got me thinking about how I wish I'd taken out the trash much sooner. But I think here's the key thing. It's noticing what trash even is. Because I think that's the difficulty. If we knew how to identify trash, not only would we get rid of it sooner when we're supposed to get rid of it, we'd also be able to treat it as it should be treated. I had this people-pleasing issue. Nothing was trash. I had a friend who used to call me benefit of the doubt. I would not be able to recognize when somebody has run their course or when something has run its course in my life. And then there's the other side where your disdain for things is so high, or for people is so high, that you automatically label them as something that is absolutely negative, where you do away with things a little too quickly, maybe a little too soon. Yo, I won't be long. Subscribe. I would really appreciate it if you send this to somebody if you really find it useful. I think it's important for everybody to experience what being could look like for them. Don't be selfish. If you're enjoying the experience, even if you're not, maybe somebody else will. Do what you gotta do. Here's to being. Enjoy the rest of the pod. Alrighty, welcome to this episode of Being. I am super ecstatic to finally be back for, well, this time around. If you guys don't know, Being started towards, like, around the beginning of last year, around last year, April. And it has just been an on and off relationship, sadly, if I'm being quite honest. And I'm hoping that this time around, quite determined about it actually, we are just going to go off on a really consistent streak. A reminder just popped up. You know, something told me to switch off my notifications, but let's hope that will be the last one. Let me actually just switch them off right now. There we go. Or rather put them on silent. So, yeah, man, for reasons worse than notifications, or a lot more hectic than notifications, Being has, well, it was just an on and off, you know, thing. And I think a number of you didn't even know that I had a podcast. And so many people were saying, Bahumi, please get a podcast, please get a podcast. And I was like, guys, I do have one. I just wasn't consistent with it, which is absolutely sad, really. So this time around, for this new era of Being, I certainly, you know, endeavored to be a lot more consistent. And lo and behold, I think for the past 2 weeks, I was hit. I mean, it's winter right now in South Africa, so I was hit with like one heck of a cold. And it's not one of those like, I'm calling in sick, I can't, you know. If you know me, I'm the kind of person who, if I'm not feeling well, I'm the type to go to work literally like coughing and, you know, pretty much almost close to death, but not really like, you know, dying, because we're not the dying type. And then, you know, just so I can power through. So because this one was really that hectic, I couldn't even use my voice. It was extremely bad. So I felt so bad, and I did my best to see if I could record, but something in me, that something was probably God, was just like, my daughter, it's fine, just rest. Everything happens in divine timing. And lo and behold, it did, because that break or that week gave me time to, I feel like today's topic is going to hit way harder, if you will, because of the time that I'd spent just thinking on it. Also, just because of the fact that it actually really did essentially come up last week. If you don't already know, we are in the month of June, which is Youth Month for my fellow South Africans. And I'm really excited about this month. I love Youth Month. It's one of my favorite months, or at least one of my favorite public holidays. And I think it's because, you know, I think the youth, or one's youth, is probably our most pivotal time. Probably a subjective, you know, opinion, but I think it's our most pivotal time, and I think it's a month where the youth of the country is more intentional in thinking about how their current decisions mark their future or shape their future. I think it's also really pivotal because it helps us to reflect on just how far our country has come, exactly what caused the celebration, if you will, for this month, for Youth Month, which is the Soweto uprising that happened in 1976. So it's a very important month in South Africa, and it's not a month that I just want us to just, kind of make it like water off a duck's back kind of thing, you know what I mean? Like just bypass it like it's just another public holiday. It's not. It's really, really important. So with that, the very first episode in this New Being era was us reflecting on Youth Day, Youth Month, and the Soweto uprising, and pretty much seeing what things, we could have learned from the youth of 1976. And to see how we could take some of those things that they may have put into practice and, play them out in our lives, see the place that they hold in our lives right now, and see how we could shape our future for the better with some of the lessons that, we can take from them. And then it also got me thinking about all the things that I wish I knew when I was younger. That's actually the main message, at least personally, for this month of being. What are the things that I wish I knew when I was younger? Yes, I know, look, I'm not the kind of person who's very regretful. I regret very little, if anything at all. So I'm not the kind of person who's like, man, I really, really think that if I knew that, then my life would have been better, or some of the things that I went through, I didn't have to go through. Excuse me. There may be truth in that. However, I'm the kind of person who says, look, this happened. Since it happened, how do we move forward? And, just, and how do we take whatever knowledge or things we learned and impart it onto, the next generation or other people? And so when I say there are things that I wish I knew then, I don't say that necessarily in a regretful way with regards to how my life turned out per se, I say that more as a... How do I say that? I want to say, to be quite honest, I think I say that more as a figure of speech, and to say that, if I'm being honest, I think it becomes less about younger me, like me when I was younger, and more about what I hope the youth of today, somebody else today who is the age that I was at back then, could start off with new information that I didn't have when I was younger. They start off on a different foundation, if you will, because they now have information that they probably may not have been privy to had I not shared it. And perhaps even for somebody who isn't young, by young I mean, isn't in their teenage years, if you will, and they did not know this, and maybe, let's all just share information. I think this is also an invitation to you. If you have any information that yes, if you knew this earlier, if you knew this when you were younger, you would love to share it with me in the comments. Please let a girl know. I'm all about learning. If you know me, yes, like it. I can yap and I can listen, because I love to feed myself with information that's going to help me and better me. So that's the point of today's conversation. I really hope that you guys enjoy it. I hope you enjoy it way more than I enjoy sharing it, if you will, because something tells me we may get a little personal. I generally don't know where these conversations are going to go. I just let God lead, and we hope we don't have to delete anything. All right. Why is there an airplane? Oh gosh. Okay. Because it's a podcast, guys, I'm not going to be too privy on sound and all these kinds of things. I'm actually recording this one man, so I'm not going to pause. I'm not going to do all that shebang. If you hear an airplane, it's not your first time hearing an airplane. Let's just hope that it'll be fine. How are we doing for time? Alrighty. For those of you guys who are watching, yes, I do have two mics. Quite literally, we're just doing all damage control and covering all our bases. So, yeah, don't mind that. What do I wish I knew then that I know now? Part 2. This came up last week when I was clearing up the house and, Nikki Puta, just, cleaning up things here and there. It wasn't like a huge spring clean because, like I said, I wasn't feeling too good. But, cleanliness is close to godliness. So no matter the economy, no matter the feeling, my home has to be, clean. And in fact, I honestly think that a clean space is a part of healing. So I was just making sure that like everything is clean, dishes are washed, the bare minimum is done. Also me, myself, and I, that's something else I don't compromise on. Hygiene is key. I make sure that we take care of ourselves, even if I have to just put on a clean pair of a matching set of track pants. If you don't know, I'm doing this thing called being put together every single day. So regardless of the economy, the state, the health, we ensure that we look put together, and it's even like simple clothes, right? A matching set of track pants. Anyway, so while I'm taking care of myself in the home, I was thinking about the podcast, of course, and just thinking about how we're going to do part 2. And I asked God about it. I talk to God very conversationally, even as I do things around the house. So I'm clearing up, and then I take my things and I go outside to go throw the rubbish out. And it came to me instinctively. I'm trying to say it in like a very poetic way, but it's really not coming, so I may as well tell it to you exactly how it came to me. Take out the trash. If you guys could see me, like those who are listening, I am literally like you make that face when you feel like you just said a bar, even if it's not that very bar-y to everybody else, but to you it's a bar, because it's personal. That's the face that I'm making. I'm just like, oh, yes, That's what I wish I knew to do when I was younger, to take out the trash sooner. All right. So if you know me, I wouldn't say that I'm like OCD or like a neat freak or anything of the sort, right? But I do like a clean space. I know some people who would probably beg to differ. Those are my very, very younger, pre-grown Bahumi days. But I'm the kind of person, I've never liked a dirty place, period. But I do think that there's a difference between like dirt and like maybe clutter, And so before I was just like, clutter, clutter here, clutter there, all that kind of stuff. Now I actually can't even focus or concentrate, at least to the best of my ability, when the place is cluttered. I think that an area really does help with your psychology. It helps with your mood. I also heard that, it helps with, psychologically that is, it helps with, or rather anxiety is also linked to your surroundings and, how cluttered a space is. So, we've grown and we've matured and things have become just a lot better and a lot neater. So I really do like a clean place. I'm not a neat freak, but I do like a clean place. The older I've gotten, I have been more sensitive to my environment. I've been more sensitive to things. I think now it's especially cleanliness. I think that the older I've gotten, I've started to see how that perspective or that shift in my life has trickled on down into various areas of my life as well. My relationships, friendships, romantic relationships, family relationships, my relationship with things like my career, like my spending, my finances. I really do like a clean atmosphere, if we're going to stick with that metaphor, right? And it just got me thinking about how when I was younger, I actually wish I took out the trash way sooner. I think one of the reasons why that was incited was because I said now I really do like a clean space. I don't even keep a bin in the house, right? I'm the kind of person who, like, you know how like complexes and estates have refuse areas. I will take the things out like on that night, like that evening, right? There have been a few times where even like washing the dishes has just been like, I want to make sure that, you know, the area where my dishes are just spotless, it's clean, you know, and things are in the sink. I'm not like washing every single plate, you know, but things are in the sink, and then before I go to bed I wash the dishes. And if I don't, like if I'm not feeling too well, I don't even know if this is neat or whatever it is, call it silly, but I'm being vulnerable with you guys here. Okay, if I don't feel like washing the dishes because I don't want any sort of infestation, I don't know how my neighbors are, so I don't want anything to invite anything negative, I will take my dishes and I'll put them in the fridge. Thank God I don't live with people, so, you know, it literally would just be like a plate or two, put them in the fridge. The next morning, I will wash and then, you know, call it a day. So I don't even like putting the trash outside in the, like, on in my balcony, right? I don't want anything to invite anything. So that morning, I guess, again, because I wasn't feeling too well, I guess maybe that night I probably forgot to take out the trash. And I keep the trash outside until I have to take it out to, you know, the refuse area. And so then I remembered, oh yeah, well, I came back, I went outside and I saw the trash from the day before. And I was like, man, like, I said I wasn't going to do this, and now, you know, now I'm doing it. Now, it didn't look disgusting or anything like that. The trash wasn't like super old, but it just got me thinking about how I had planned to ensure that I take the trash out on a daily basis, and I didn't the day before. So, and then hence it incited how I wish I took the trash out sooner when I was much younger. And trash is symbolic of a number of things, right? Things that you really just had no business dealing with beyond the year or two that they were useful for. You know, things that you really had no business dealing with 5 years in, 10 years in, you know what I mean? Some things that I've had since I was super, super young, probably like in my teenage years, and I only started decluttering them maybe like last year, right? I was a teenager over 10 years ago, I think, yeah. You know? So it just got me thinking about how I wish I'd taken out the trash much sooner. But I think here's the key thing. It's noticing what trash even is. Because I think that's the difficulty when you're younger. Yes, at least I recently learned that our frontal lobes don't develop fully, at least maybe until we're like 24, 25 or so. So, you know, I will give us that grace, you know. We knew very little, and also, you know, emotional maturity, all of that kind of stuff. This is why I regret very little, right? Because we were much younger, we didn't know any better. And even if it's not an age thing, sometimes you only know what you know based on your conditioning and your circumstances. So the grace that I can give myself when I was younger is that, you know, it was very difficult to identify what trash is. But, you know, that's one thing I wish I knew. Because obviously, if I knew how to identify it, I would have done things a lot more differently. It then got me thinking about how then do I identify what trash is. Now, this isn't something that I studied. I actually wish I would have, because I did basic studying, you know, but usually before a podcast episode, I like to, you know, do a bit of research on certain things, especially as far as the human psychology is concerned. So I didn't do much of that today. So today is just going to be it's just going to be simply conversational, you know, as if I'm talking to a friend. Hey, friends. Hey. And just like, you know, sharing my ideas before any, I guess, expertly informed information, right? One of the things that I started thinking about was how trash is identified. And then I started thinking about the nature of trash itself, right? Before considering this conversation, well, firstly, before considering the conversation, I never really thought much about trash, right? But I also started thinking about how we often have a very negative connotation, or idea about trash. And I understand, of course, where it comes from, because, this is it's refuse that we throw away, right? Quote unquote garbage. So it festers, stinks up the place, all of that. So we don't really think much of it. And if we do think anything of it, it's definitely negative. I even thought about how perhaps even as soon as I said the word trash, you started thinking about people, maybe, the people that you would consider that term. And it's never something I have really liked. I mean, I know this is probably going to be a controversial opinion, even though I understand where a lot of people come from when they do express this. There was and probably still exists, in a sense, a movement where, the men of our country, based on a number of their behaviors, rightfully so, were identified as this word. I'm being careful not to say it because, next thing YouTube is going to, I don't want YouTube to ban or silence me for something I didn't say. They catch things that they shouldn't, that aren't there sometimes. But you know what I mean, right? So there was this movement where we said men are this word. And I was very, very careful to say something like that, especially so with such conviction, as much as I understand why one would call somebody that, we need to be very careful with certain generalizations. And we need, not necessarily just because, well, not all men are that word, or not all, just in the same way that people say, well, not all men cheat, things like that, right? That's true, but not necessarily just because of that. However, because of how it shapes the trajectory of how we move forward. I think the things that caused such movements are extremely important, but probably equally as important, if not more important, is how our response to that shapes our future, shapes how we move forward, and how, because it shows how you help the situation, So yes, it's important for us to identify issues without, supposedly two wrongs making a right. Right. You know what I mean when I say that. Anyways, see, I digressed a little, forgive. What that did bring me to, though, was considering how, whenever you use the word trash, you think about something negative or somebody negative. However, if we're careful with that word, we'll realize that trash isn't necessarily something as inherently negative as we think it is. And perhaps that's probably one of the reasons why we don't let go of it sooner. Right? You're gonna understand what I mean now. I'm gonna bring it all together. Right? When I was younger, I had this people-pleasing issue, right? Where I speak of how it's problematic to just label something as trash. I was on the other opposite of the spectrum, where nothing was trash, whether it's situations, whether, in a sense, If I think about it holistically, I think that was essentially my idea. I had a friend who used to call me benefit of the doubt, because I used to give a lot of people the benefit of the doubt, and a part of me still likes that trait about me. I don't think that it's inherently bad. However, I would not be able to recognize when somebody has run their course, or when something has run its course in my life. And I think that this also had to do with traits that I had as well. So I don't just mean, because sometimes we just think about things as far as other people are concerned. So, that person is toxic, they don't belong in my life, or that thing is just not for me, it's not serving me, or whatever. But you have traits as well that are not serving you, and we have to look at things holistically. So there were certain things where I was people pleasing, but I was also pleasing my fleshly desires, if you will. So, certain things that were of my flesh, certain things that were not serving me, laziness, certain insecurities. There's a word I'm looking for. I think the word is like evaluate, value. There's a word that starts with an A that I'm looking for. When you're measuring something to a certain value, I wouldn't be able to do that. I would place things that were of low importance or low value, and that word that starts with an A, place them higher. And then vice versa with the things that should be low. So that's the one end. And then again, there's the other end of just completely, people pleasers are generally yes men. I think that there's the opposite as well, where everything is just too or so self-serving, which then causes you to mislabel and often negatively label things a little too quickly and a little too strictly. A bit too strictly, a little too is sounds like an oxymoron. So the people-pleasing side is saying, oh no, but they need it more than I do, even though they really don't. I'm thinking about how God says, if I'm not mistaken, be as cunning as a serpent and as meek as a dove. I don't know. There's a verse. Please don't judge my biblical knowledge. And then there's the other side where your disdain for things is so high, or for people is so high, that you automatically label them as something that is absolutely negative. Where you do away with things a little too quickly, maybe, a little too soon. That's hurt, too. If we stick with the trash metaphor, maybe you're the type to, not like the smell so much. It reeks so much for you that you start to label the thing itself, even though you're the one who bought it, even though you liked it at some point, even though you had use for it at some point. You start to label the thing itself as just horrible. So if it's, I don't know, maybe a piece of chicken or a piece of meat or some canned food that, was in the fridge and was left open, and it stinks up the place. So now that it's gone bad, it's time for you to throw it out, right? But you hate it so much that instead of saying, no, this no longer has use for me, it's got to go, you say, and the whole lot of them, all of them. In fact, I never ever want to see another can of tuna in my life. I never want to see another piece of chicken ever again in my life. All chicken sucks, is trash. I hate it. And chicken for you could be a person, chicken for you could be a business venture or pursuit. You never want to start that thing ever again. You're not going to try again. You're never going to audition again. You're never going to send through another CV ever again. You're never going to write another proposal again. Or if you write a proposal, it's never going to be to a company like that again. You're never going to fly a plane again, That time maybe it was just that airline. Maybe it was just that airplane. Maybe it was just that one bad manager. Maybe it was just that one church. Maybe it was just that one leader. If we knew how to identify trash, not only would we get rid of it sooner when we're supposed to get rid of it, we'd also be able to treat it as it should be treated. And perhaps not simply identify, let's say, people as trash, but maybe circumstances or their stay in our lives as trash. We'd be able to repurpose it. Those recycle bins or those, composting bins that are labeled, where you get the one label that says glass and you get the other label that says paper and the other label that says plastic. Maybe one that says recycle, then maybe, I don't know, but they all have, these different labels. If we knew how to identify trash, we'd be able to know, number one, that people are not trash. Yes, I know, I said it. I said what I said. But number one, we'd be able to know that people are not trash, and that maybe the situation, for example, their stay in our lives or their use in our lives is something that could be considered quote unquote trash. Because like I said, if trash isn't necessarily something that's bad, but something that has maybe gone bad for you or is no longer useful for you, it could be useful somewhere else, in your garden or whatever it is, or it can be recycled. Maybe then we'd be able to compartmentalize our lives or compartmentalize our situations, compartmentalize people. And instead of being so quick to cut people off, for example, instead of being so quick to label people, instead of being so quick to leave things or leave jobs or leave ventures, when you start a business and then you quit quarter way or halfway because things aren't going the way that you thought that they would go, and then you suddenly think, no, scrap, trash. Maybe it's not trash. Maybe you are just supposed to compartmentalize. We would instead consider having boundaries or consider having the accurate labels instead of being so quick to labeling something as garbage, or just trash. That thing that you call trash was once something that you treasured. And if you didn't treasure it, or at least hold it to a high regard, you certainly had some sort of use for it. And it's only called trash because you no longer have use for it. Now, I say this very carefully. This is still metaphorical for sure, but don't apply this metaphor to quite literally everything, right? I just need to give those disclaimers, because then you'll have people who say things like, oh, so you're saying, and it's just like, bro, don't me too everything, okay? But let's just use common sense to stick with me here. Forgive me if I'm sounding crass. In the simplest of senses, what you now call trash is something that you once treasured. Quite literally everything, if I'm not mistaken, everything that's in my trash bag is something that I needed at some point, something that I used at some point. And now because I no longer have any use for it, it goes in the trash, right? Perhaps it's expired, meaning it in and of itself, intrinsically, it had use, right? Or inherently, it had use, or it has use, or it had purpose. However, it overstayed its welcome. Perhaps I took it for granted, or I don't need it anymore, or I didn't need it. Whatever the reason may be, it is no longer useful to me, so it then gets disposed of. I actually recently learned, I think I saw a video recently, that apparently the concept of trash never really existed. I could be wrong, and maybe the person could be wrong too. It's a TikTok video, and it's another opinion. But apparently the concept of trash was never necessarily something that was like a thing. It's actually something that, was created. Essentially, what people used to do was to reuse or recycle a lot of the things that we now call trash, right? So instead of teaching us how to repurpose things or how to recycle things or how to use certain things as compost, for example, sometimes when I throw my food or certain foods in the garden, or when I throw seeds, or when I'm done with an apple and I throw it out, my friends are always like, no, why are you littering? And I'm like, no, this is not littering. This is repurposing. If I'm going to take the banana peel, I'm going to put it and use it as compost. If I'm done with an apple, I throw it out and I see birds eat it. Now, I'm not saying that I should be careless with it and just throw it in someone's garden, for example. That's what I do. But the point that I'm making is that the idea of trash isn't something that existed at some point in time. People just knew how to reuse or repurpose their garbage, if you will. And now, because, I don't know, I assume maybe for capitalist reasons, I could be wrong, people aren't taught that anymore. we're taught maybe ease as well, and would rather have somebody else deal with it. And then it just piles up somewhere, and then, that's its own story. However, that just goes to show how that there is an ecosystem of things, even as far as trash is concerned. And so because of that, we can't necessarily inherently call something trash. Maybe the idea of trash being inherently negative is something we were taught, and us identifying it correctly will allow us to deal with it accordingly. I like how we're supposed to talk about all the things that I wish I had let go of in terms of trash, and having let go of trash much sooner. But I think that this has also sort of turned into identifying what trash actually is, and when it was okay that I gave things, or when it is okay to give things a bit more of a chance. I'm not saying that you must consistently give things a chance. I'm not saying that, when you can clearly see that a stick is a stick or a spade is a spade, that, you want to delusion yourself, if that was a verb, and delude yourself and call it something else. What I am saying is that if we take the time to assess situations, to think, to breathe, to ask, to have conversations, we'll be able to identify when something has overstayed its welcome in our lives, when something is clearly trash for us and it now has to go. We'll be able to decide and discern where it should go. Remember what I spoke about with the different bins and allocating things or placing certain boundaries where boundaries are needed, instead of simply labeling something as toxic. So we'll be able to know when something is supposed to go, and we'll be able to know when something should be given another chance, when something should stay. Therapy should be able to help with that. And again, going back, because I know there's already some people who are like, therapy already worked for me. It's not, it was that therapist. It was that situation. So perhaps there's another one that you can work with. I know that there are things that aren't accessible to everyone, things like therapy. One of the things that I've recognized as a privilege in a sense is I'm really grateful that there's information that I was able to access. And this is part of the reason for the podcast, is that information that I was able to access, maybe somebody else wasn't able to access it. I'm hoping that this will be a platform that will allow you that access, at least some of the nuggets. And if I do find more ways to access things, even if it's not therapy but something else, I will be sure to share it. But yeah, on the topic of trash and knowing when to take it out, I think that there are some things that I, of course, wish I let go of sooner, and perhaps it would have served a different purpose in somebody else's life, or maybe they served a better purpose in somebody else's life, just not mine. However, there are things that I'm glad I gave a longer chance to and was able to see them through. There are things that I really had no business seeing through. Even if I said, let's see if I can, no. Sometimes, of course, you learn these things with time and new information. But you also have to know when it is your discernment or your conscience speaking, and when it is fear speaking, when it is hurt speaking, when it is anxiety speaking. And stillness really, really does help with that, taking time to just allow yourself to be still and vulnerable, and really ask yourself questions. And as you go through these questions, ask God, ask yourself, as you go through these questions, and as you keep asking further and further questions, going deeper, the answer will come. And you may not like it, but you'll be able to identify that this is not discernment talking, this is fear talking. Yeah, I'm glad that there are certain things that I was able to give a chance. And a longer chance at that. And sometimes something can be trash in one season, but treasure in another. So it's not just something being treasured to something else or someone else, but something being treasured in a different season. I hope that helps you in some sense. I never really know how to end these, and this is when I feel awkward, so I guess now is the best time to do so. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and if you find this to be useful and helpful, I know I went around in a million tangents. My mind works in an interesting way. I think I may know why, but that's another story for another day. But I really do hope that this was beneficial for you. If you find it beneficial for somebody else, or you think that maybe somebody else can benefit from it as well, you know what to do. Please share it. And yeah, man, see you in the next episode. Bye. Here's to being. Oh, there was another thing I wanted to say. Oopsie. Hold on. Sorry. There's one thing I wanted to say. I don't exactly know how to say this, but I'm very particular with the conversations that I have with people, and I'm especially particular about it if it's going to be here on this platform. So whoever you would like to be on the Being podcast, let me know, because I want this to be a relationship between the two of us. Let me know who you'd like to see on this podcast. People who are, I'd love to say open. However, I think who are as close to vulnerable as possible. Or, as open to vulnerability as possible. I don't want to necessarily make a square that's unnecessarily rigid for the kinds of people that we're going to have on the podcast. But if you think being, whose minds would you like to explore on being? Let me know, and we'll look into it. I already know who I want to be as my first guest. Fun fact, I've interviewed, if not 3 people, but I think it's 2 people so far. Amazing, lovely people, both public figures. And it's funny because I still have that hard drive. Hard drives did what... I don't want to say hard drives did what hard drives do, because we're not going to bring that into the future. But, I'm hoping that if that hard drive can be fixed, we'll have access to that pod. Having said that, there's always been somebody who I wanted as my first guest, even with my very first podcast that I once had. And I don't know how it's going to happen. I'm praying to God that He makes it happen. You can guess and let me know who you think that person is. However, just let me know who you would like to see on the podcast. And that's the next thing that I'll be exploring as we have these one-on-one conversations. Just considering the kinds of people that we'd like to have on this podcast beyond our one-on-ones. So with that, here's to being. Bye guys, much love.